Okay, today this is the Handyman. We're going to be replacing a toilet. So you want to do when you're first replacing a toilet in a home is you want to make sure that you got the right toilet. You want to make sure the tank distance, the seat distance is all correct. So this toilet here is 12 inches from the wall to the center. That's a very common size. So I had measured that out. I had bought a toilet to replace it, another two-piece, which I have assembled already. And there's no issues on it whatsoever for replacing it. So the first thing you want to do when you get into doing this is, on the toilet, you want to make sure you shut off the water on the back of it. Then you want to take and go on the sides here. There's some bolts on each side and there's a nut coming up on each part. You want to take those nuts off. A regular wrench should be able to do that for you without a problem. You want to remove the back of the tank. Flush all that extra water down into the bottom of the toilet. Then in the back of the toilet, you want to take a bucket and a rag, and you want to absorb as much as you can of that water. You know, sop it up, put it in here, sop it up, put it in here. Because when you pull the braided hose off the back of this toilet, you don't want that water to pour down on the floor, and it will. Then you're going to go down into here, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to push the water that's in here that hasn't flushed down into the drain, down into the drain. Then you're going to sob up the other, put it in the bucket, sob up the other, put it in the bucket. So your toilet's nice and dry. You won't have any water issues. Now you're going to undo that braided hose. You've got the back all dried out. There's no water down on it. So you can take that down. You've got the nuts off on each side. And now you're going to lift up the toilet. Remember, when you pull the toilet, you don't want to take and slide it. You don't want to take and wiggle it straight up because you have a flange down there. You don't want to break it off with the bolts that are there. So that goes straight up. Remember, bend your legs, keep your back straight. Lift it up. Toilets are very heavy. And walk it out. Then when you get down into here, you want to clean this up. This toilet here, the wax ring is dissipated, all the way gone. So what you want to do is, you want to take a putty knife, clean up the best you can any old wax that's there. And there's a little bit here. Not much though, not much at all. So I'm cleaning this toilet off here, and I'm only getting a little bit of wax. And there's nothing on the bottom of it, barely any. So this toilet should have been replaced a while ago, because what that wax rings does, and I'm sure if you're replacing a toilet, you know, it stops the scent from coming up from the sewer, and it also stops the water from leaking on the floor. If you got either one of those things going on, you've got issues. So make sure you clean that up real good. Now, after that's cleaned up, you want to take in, some people will reuse a braided hose. It's not recommended at all. I always take the braided hose off. I recommend a new one. It'll take long to remove it. For the amount of time that you use these, it's worth replacing. Because if that hose breaks, it's going to be a nightmare. And on a braided hose, I like to use a long hose. I'll bend it down because every back of toilet's different. You can buy them in different sizes, but as they say, you can't stretch one. So you can always bend it down. You put that on nice and tight. Don't go too tight because it's somewhat of a pressure fitting with the rubber bushings. That'll do it. It's not too crazy. Let's get in here again. And make sure it's nice and clean back here while you're here. Nobody cleans behind their toilet. So give it that once in every 10 to 12 years clean, and sometimes 15 to 20. Now the wax ring that should have been here that we saw when we lifted up that was missing is fairly large. When you buy a toilet, a lot of them comes with wax rings now. I don't recommend those wax rings. They're not very thick. Sometimes it's just a wax ring. If you go and you buy a better wax ring, they're extra thick ones they make, and they actually put right inside of a funnel too. So these rings are much better. You put that ring down on that in the center. So now it's going to seal it. It's also going to give you a funnel for that water to go into. It's going to take away a lot of worries. So that's a definite to do. You're going to put in new bolts that should come with your wax ring or your toilet, depending on manufacturer. And then those go down. They get nutted back down too, so that they're holding tight. And what you want to do is when you put these bolts on, you want to make sure that those bolts are in the center of what you're doing, because that's how you're centering that toilet back on with those bolts. So they'll go on like this. If the flange is put down properly, it should be centered, but you really gotta check that sometimes, because sometimes it's not. Screw those on. Make sure that they're on there, and make sure that it is centered. For some reason you don't think it's centered, it doesn't hurt to take and put a tape measure against the wall and find your centering. Just like anything else, it's always good to measure. Just make sure that they're nice and tight. That's what it comes down to. Okay, that's good. All right. So now we got the wax rings on, we got the bolts there. So we replace the braided hose. So always remember, when you replace a toilet, always new wax ring, new bladed hose. That's a very important thing I find. And don't buy cheap ones. It's really extra money. A lot of water pressure in these things when they break, so if it goes, you're going to know it. So in here, I've got my new toilet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry it in the same way I carried the other. I'm going to get it level over the top. And then I'm going to eye them up with the bolts down below, because I've got that wax ring in the center. And you want to take your time doing this. If you're not strong enough, don't do this on your own, because you only get one chance with that wax ring. Now, I've set that on there. Now the wax ring, it's kind of balancing on it right now because it's so thick, and that's what I want. So I'm letting the weight of the toilet literally flatten that wax ring. And what that's going to do for me is that's going to make it perfect. A nice seal right down to the floor. I'm not rushing it. Let it take its time. Let it just sit there. It's going to slowly go down. I can hook up my braided hose while I'm waiting on the back, because it's getting there pretty close. It'll take it a minute or so to settle. If your wax is cold, for some reason you had it out in your car in the northern part of America or wherever you are, that wax is going to be too hard. You want to make sure it's not cold, because you want it soft. So it does swish down. And let that just go right down like that. So let it just sit for a second. So then, as this is going down, right here, so now I'm just going to give it a little more pressure, and the easiest way to do that on a toilet is a little bit of bum pressure. Sitting down on the job. So now that's flattened down for me. So what I want to do now is I want to put on my nuts down on the toilet. And I say that, I mean my wing nuts. Put those down, and what that's going to do is this is what's going to pull the flange tight up against the toilet. So when you're doing this, you don't want to go crazy on this either. Don't be cranking these down like nuts, okay? Just, get them in there hand tight. If you want, in a day or so, you can go back and tighten them a little more. But remember, you're tightening on porcelain. You can't over-tighten porcelain. You'll crack it. And as thick as you think the toilet is, trust me, you can crack them. So we tighten these down like that. That's on there. That's on there. It's looking pretty good. This toilet is looking good. So now, everything's on. Everything's pre-assembled in the toilet. Everything looks good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on the water slowly. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look for water drips, is what it comes down to. I want to see if anything's leaking anywhere. I want to make sure I got no leaks in my tank that I had to assemble. The lower end of the toilet, and I'm going to let that toilet fill up. I'm going to flush it. I'm going to flush it a dozen times before I walk away, because I want to make sure that there's no leaks on this toilet at all. It's looking pretty good right now. I don't see any leaks there. Everything's tight. Like I say, don't over tight. Even on the back of your toilet, when you put that braided hose on, you don't want to over tighten that. That braided hose is into the porcelain and into plastic, so you know you can't go too crazy on it. Now on the back of the toilet, you probably will have to adjust it somewhat. Sometimes from the factory they come pretty good on a flush. Sometimes you have to go up and down on it. If you're not familiar, you know, look at your manual, but there's a nut in there that usually goes down. It's usually a Phillips that you turn up and down on the plastic, and that's for your floater. So let's just see what we get here. Don't see any water on the floor. There's water on my hoses. I'm gonna let that fill again. And I'm gonna keep flushing that, like I said. I'm gonna let it sit and watch it. I got another toilet to do here at this location. I just wanna make sure that everything's good. You know, that's very important. So just remember that. Keep a good flush going. Look for water. You'll see it. It'll drip out right away. But if you take your time, you eye up those bolts, get a good wax ring, get a good seal, you're going to be fine.